Change it or obey it. Why the Constitution is the solution. Today in our nation, we have clearly strayed from the original intent of the Founding Fathers. I have a couple quotes I want to illustrate this with. First of all, with Thomas Jefferson. He says, "Congress has not unlimited powers, but only those specifically enumerated." That would be specifically enumerated in the Constitution itself. Another perspective from James Madison, Federalist 45, he tells us the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are vague, right? No, he says they are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. Now that might be a little vague, the powers that could remain to the states. But which one of those sounds bigger? Who's supposed to have more power, the few and defined federal or the many numerous and indefinite powers of the state governments? Obviously, the states were supposed to retain the majority of powers, according to James Madison, the father of the Constitution, as history calls him. Today, we've clearly reversed that, where the federal government is much bigger than they were ever intended to be. In fact, I often declare that the federal government we have today bears little resemblance to the federal government as defined by the Constitution. But further still, here we have an article from the Washington Post entitled "The Rise of the Fourth Branch of Government." Now, as I recall in my high school history classes and learning about U.S. government, there were only 3 branches of the federal government, right? Well, we have a new branch of the federal government they're talking about that has come to be. What they're referring to is the federal regulatory agencies, things like OSHA and the TSA and so on. In this article, they point out that one study found in 2007, Congress had enacted 138 new public laws, while federal agencies finalized 2,926 new rules. Every one of those rules carried with them the force of law. They are effectively new laws. The federal agencies are far outpacing Congress in the creation of those laws. Now, we're told in Article 1, Section 1, Clause 1 of the U.S. Constitution that all lawmaking power is given to Congress, not to the President, not to the Supreme Court, and not to the regulatory agencies. But today, the situation we have, these federal agencies are empowered to write their own rules, to enforce them, and to judge of their infraction. We're effectively rolling all 3 branches of government into one: the legislative, creating law, executive branch, enforcing, and the judiciary, judging of their infraction. On this concept, James Madison warned, the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands may justly be pronounced the very definition of OSHA. Okay, he didn't say OSHA. OSHA didn't exist then, but that is tyranny. And that is what OSHA and many of the other federal agencies do today. If, for example, your company is being investigated for OSHA violations, and they charge you with an OSHA violation, they're not only writing the rules, they're now enforcing them. And if you want to appeal their ruling against your company, you'll be appealing that before a judge of an OSHA court. They truly are all 3 branches of government rolled into one, far beyond anything the Founding Fathers envisioned when they created the Constitution. The question now comes up is, what do we do about it? Today we see a number of organizations that are pushing for what's called an Article 5 convention to make changes or amendments to the Constitution, which they propose this was the way to rein in the federal government. So in today's presentation, we'll be exploring some of these claims. In order for this to happen, first, there's marketing claims of convention promoters. The way this works, the convention promoters are going around to our state legislatures, because they're the ones that would decide whether or not we will have an Article 5 convention. It takes 34 states' legislatures applying for a convention, at which point then Congress calls for a convention for proposing amendments to this Constitution. As they're making various claims to our state legislators, I found that a lot of their claims are not backed by history or fact, and we need to expose some of those. In Part 2, we'll cover some of the proposed amendments that are being discussed and compare them to what we already have in the Constitution. And then in Part 3, we'll explore true constitutional solutions according to the words of the Founding Fathers themselves.